In the fading light of a November evening in 1907, a young woman walked alone through the forests of northern India, balancing a clay pot of water on her hip. She never made it home. Her screams echoed through the village of Champawat, but by the time help arrived, there was nothing left but torn fabric and drag marks leading into the darkness. She was the 436th victim of the most prolific man-eating predator in recorded history. This is not a story about a monster. This is a story about what happens when the natural order breaks down, when desperation meets opportunity, and when an entire region lives in the shadow of teeth and claws. The Champawat tiger didn't start as a killer of humans. She was a Bengal tigress, born sometime in the 1890s in the dense jungles of western Nepal. For years, she lived as nature intended, hunting deer, wild boar, and sambar in the rich Terai forests. But something went terribly wrong. Hunters who later examined her body discovered that her upper and lower canine teeth on the right side of her jaw had been shattered, likely by a bullet that failed to kill her. The injury left her unable to hunt her natural prey. Unable to bring down swift, powerful animals, she turned to something slower, softer, easier to catch: humans. Between 1898 and 1907, this single tigress killed an estimated 436 people. Let that number sink in. Not 8 people, as some abbreviated accounts claim, but 436 documented victims across Nepal and India. To put this in perspective, the average man-eating tiger might kill 2 or 3 people before being hunted down. The Champawat tiger operated on an entirely different scale. She didn't just kill, she terrorized 2 countries for nearly a decade. In Nepal, entire villages were abandoned. Fields went unplowed. Children stopped going to school. The Nepalese government deployed the army, organizing massive hunts with hundreds of soldiers beating drums and firing rifles into the jungle. Nothing worked. The tigress seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to evade capture, slipping through military cordons like smoke. After claiming 200 lives in Nepal, the concentrated hunting pressure finally drove her across the border into the Kumaon district of northern India. The people of Kumaon had no idea what was coming. The killings in India followed a horrific pattern. The tigress hunted in broad daylight, an unusual behavior that showed her complete lack of fear. She would wait near forest paths, at water sources, in fields where people worked. Sometimes she killed in the morning, sometimes at noon. Once, she killed 4 people in a single village in a single day. The attacks were so frequent that people stopped venturing outdoors after dark. Trade routes were abandoned, markets emptied. Economic life ground to a halt across an area of 1,500 square miles. What made her so effective was her intelligence. Unlike other man-eaters, she constantly changed her hunting territory, never staying in one area long enough for hunters to set up an ambush. She seemed to understand the rhythms of human pursuit. When hunting parties organized in one village, she would strike 20 miles away. When troops were deployed to one valley, she would appear in another. Her ability to adapt, to learn, to outthink her pursuers made her almost impossible to track. The British colonial government in India grew increasingly desperate. A man-eating tiger wasn't just a wildlife problem, it was a political crisis. Villages were demanding protection. Revenue collection had collapsed in the affected areas. The administration needed someone who could end this nightmare. They turned to Jim Corbett. Corbett was a legendary hunter and conservationist, a man who understood tigers better than perhaps anyone alive. He had killed man-eaters before, but never anything like this. When he arrived in Champawat in 1907, he found a population living in absolute terror. People refused to leave their homes. Those who had to venture out did so in groups, armed with whatever weapons they could find, singing loudly to ward off the tigress. Corbett began tracking her, studying the kill sites, interviewing survivors and witnesses. What he discovered chilled him. The tigress had developed a technique. She would often wound rather than kill immediately, using the victim's screams to scatter any companions, ensuring she could feed without interruption. She had learned that humans, unlike deer, would call for help and that help would flee. For weeks, Corbett followed her trail through the rugged Kumaon hills. She remained always one step ahead, a phantom that killed and vanished. Then, in a stroke of fortune, she made her final kill. A young girl who had been cutting grass near Champawat. The village erupted in mourning and rage. That afternoon, 300 villagers armed with drums and horns helped Corbett organize a massive beat, driving the tigress toward a narrow valley where he waited. As the sun began to set, Corbett finally saw her. She emerged from the tall grass about 150 yards away, her coat gleaming in the golden light. For a moment, hunter and tigress regarded each other. Then Corbett fired. The first shot struck her and she bounded into cover. The second shot, fired as she tried to escape, killed her. When Corbett and the villagers examined her body, they found an old tigress, worn down by years of surviving on an unnatural diet, but still powerful, still deadly. Her shattered teeth told the story of how this had all begun. A wounded animal, unable to hunt normally, forced to adapt or starve. She had adapted too well. The relief that swept through the region was profound. People wept. Strangers embraced. After 9 years of terror, after 436 deaths, after countless lives disrupted by fear, the nightmare was finally over. Villages that had been abandoned slowly came back to life. Trade resumed. Children played outdoors again. The Champawat tiger remains the deadliest individual man-eater in recorded history. No lion, no tiger, no other predator has ever killed more people. Her story raises uncomfortable questions about the boundaries between human and wild spaces, about what happens when we wound the natural world, about the consequences of encroachment and conflict. That tigress didn't choose to become a killer of humans. Circumstances forced her into it. A single bullet, fired perhaps by a trophy hunter, transformed her from a normal predator into history's most lethal man-eater. Today, her skull is preserved in a museum, a silent testament to one of the darkest chapters in the long, complex relationship between humans and tigers. It reminds us that the most dangerous animals are often the most desperate, and that the line between the natural world and our own is thinner and more fragile than we like to believe.